Good morning. This is Dr. Shamma Al-Malik from Department of Energy, Abu Dhabi, the Executive Director of Strategic Affairs. I would like to welcome you in the 6th day of COP26 in UAE Pavilion. Today we have a vital subject related to net zero emissions, which is about the importance of behavioral nudging for climate change. And this will be discussed with our distinguished speakers. I think our panel is very special today and unique because we have talented, expert ladies, beautiful ladies, to give us a lot of information about this subject. And I will start to introduce our speakers. First, Engineer Fatma Al-Shamsi, Energy Policy Executive Director from Department of Energy, Abu Dhabi. Ms. Suad Al-Serkal, Vice President of Strategic Communication at Tabreed, Abu Dhabi, UAE. Ms. Sarah Mu'arraf, Head of the Environment and Climate Change Unit at the International Energy Agency. Good morning, ladies.
Morning.
Behavioral interventions are increasingly being identified as an effective tool in promoting energy efficiency and sustainability to reverse climate change impacts. Moreover, best practices suggest that changing economic strategies, services, business governance, policy making, and operational level cannot be enough to address climate change. So such activities must be complemented by behavioral intervention to define behavioral change needs. And my first question will be to you, Engineer Fatma, about what are the social impulses and motivation that drive sustainability decisions, and how can policymakers develop behavioral nudging strategies to address pressing issues like energy efficiency and climate change?
First of all, thank you for having me, and always happy to be in this kind of important discussion in the COP. We can list reducing the spend of the household, reducing the impact on the environment. You can add to that preserve the natural resources for the future generation. But you know what? We always forget about the most important thing. And it's not that we forget about it. Actually, we are working on it, but we miss the linkage between this and the sustainability. Where we are here, the climate change is very important factor and the driver for the behavioral changes. Always, or most of the time, behavioral changes is neglected when we talk about possible mitigation for the climate change and to reduce the emission. The behavioral changes always impacted or has the impact on the decision, but when you define the impact or the different scenarios of the strategy we set for the climate change, we don't figure out the real impact of the behavioral changes. If we see that most of the greenhouse gases emission is coming from household or our lifestyle, including mobility, diet, housing, that is having a great impact on the emission, while it's not reflected when we talk about the reducing or achieving the Paris Agreement and reduction or major reduction of the CO2. We cannot achieve the climate neutrality policy with only technological changes. What we need is also, or likely we need to have a plan for the behavioral changes, to change the way we use food or we use the energy sources or we consume it. We need to think about not only the production part, we need to think about consumption part. from the production, we always talk about energy generation, we are always talking about food production, but the area of consumption, the goods and services, most of the time is not considered or somehow considered partially. If we think about, or as a government, as a policy maker, while setting the climate change strategy or climate neutrality, long-term climate neutrality strategies, this should be considered while developing different scenarios, how the behavioral changes will impact the reduction required to achieve the international target. In Abu Dhabi, we have our demand side management for power and water targeting 32% reduction of the water consumption and 22% reduction of the power consumption by 2030, which is equivalent to 9 million tons of CO2 emission reduction. 790 gigawatt hour is, inshallah, will be a result of the behavioral changes program that we are executing. Also 40 million meter cube of water. That is equivalent to 430,000 tons of CO2 emission that will be reduced due to the behavioral changes program in our plan.
So it is a series of actions needs to be taken across all the chain supply from the beginning to the end, with the different actions to be taken and covering many themes and sectors. And my next point about the financial implication of for individual and for the government as well. So my question to you, Ms. Suad, about how do we maximize social and economic benefits when designing individual behavioral change programs? And as I said, what is the financial implications?
So first of all, thank you so much. I mean, us being here is just a confirmation to our commitment toward climate change, and we have solutions and we're here to put them into action. In regards to your questions, the way we maximize the benefit on the environment is to provide sustainable solutions that are attainable for the people with maximum environmental effect, with minimum requirement of effort on the individual. So if we start redesigning the provision of energy and utilities in line with the environmental mandate and also providing them in a more affordable and attainable way to the individual, we will all be on the same page and we will all actually achieve that goal much, much faster. It's just like when you talk about organic food. Organic food is known to be much more expensive than regular groceries. Now, if we normalize organic food and we make it cheaper for the consumer to actually buy it, that will become the norm. Everyone will be on board with the organic food train. So what Tabreed did right now, and it's one of the most important things that we've kind of like changed and shifted, is changing or rebranding ourselves from being a utilities company to becoming a developer, and basically having more control on developing our district cooling plants and providing our green tech technologies and our solutions to better assist the environment and to basically optimize our operations. We basically, with this shift, we provide people with the solutions, the technology, the way of protecting the environment without the capex. So we take on board all that as a developer. We spend the money. We currently are in partnerships with a lot of developers that are implementing district cooling into their infrastructures, in their smart cities, in their smart buildings, and assisting of achieving that goal much, much faster. In 2020 alone, to showcase how important district cooling is when it comes to the environment, 2020 alone, Tabreed has saved over 2.2 billion kilowatt hours in regards to energy, which is equivalent to powering over 120,000 homes annually. And we prevented the emissions of over 1.3 million metric tons of CO2, which is equivalent of basically removing over 290,000 cars off the streets annually. So it's not a one-man job kind of situation. Everyone needs to kind of put in their technologies, their money to walk the talk, basically. And it's not just us, but we are here to kind of provide this. And as I said, is making it attainable, affordable, and changing the perspective of like, oh my God, do I have to think about doing this for the environment, or is it literally just a way of life?
Yeah. Thank you for the interesting figures and statistics that you mentioned. Very interested. So my next question to you, Sarah, sorry. And as per the net zero by 2050, the report already published by International Energy Agency, which shows the roadmap for the energy sector, how we can reach the net zero by 2050. It was mentioned that the behavioral change reduces energy-related activity by around 10 to 15% on average over the period to 2050. I just mentioned that. And my question is related to that, and if you elaborate to us more about it. So what are the key areas of alignment and cooperation for energy and environment policymakers to utilize nudging professionally to drive climate-friendly behavior?
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here and to hear these really interesting insights and great examples that are very concrete. And so as you mentioned, the IEA, we're a global organization, and we produced a global roadmap for the energy sector reaching net zero emissions by 2050. But a lot of the insights we put in the scenario that draw on behavior are from understanding concrete examples and things countries have managed to do. So it's always very interesting to hear what's possible and feasible, and it helps us also understand how we can reflect that in thinking. And it's true that in 2050, you know, if we didn't include behavioral change in our scenario, we would have much more energy consumption, and particularly electricity consumption would be 16,000 terawatt hours higher. So that's quite a large chunk that you can save. And in thinking about that sort of such a steep reduction pathway, there are areas where it's very difficult to consider how we reach it without some form of behavioral change. So I'll mention 3 areas in particular where in the scenario they really use these tools and these levers. And the first I'll mention probably is the buildings, because this has been raised twice, is the consumption from just the built sector, commercial buildings, residential buildings, is really important. And if we can make shifts in these areas, then it can have a big impact on electricity consumption. So whether it's through increased efficiency and including in cold climates, really reducing indoor heating temperatures, for example. If you can have simple measures where your indoor heating temperature is not excessively warm in cold months, and there's a lot of other things that are around that. And can you encourage people to do this through information, through more efficient building systems, through some sort of incentives, and also changing their energy sources, switching to different types of cooling systems, different types of appliance equipment. It can make a big difference. So that's a very key area. The second is road transport, because even in a net zero scenario where you're actually shifting to electric vehicles very quickly and you're decarbonizing power quickly to actually reach that goal, there is a period up to 2030 where you still have in the stock a lot of conventional vehicles, and how those are used has a big impact, can really influence the overall emissions level. So there's many measures where reducing the use of these vehicles in urban areas, or reducing speed limits, having more eco-driving, encouraging alternative modes of transport. All these things can impact how much you're using that fleet of conventional cars. And the third area, which is a complicated area, and the reason behavior has an impact is it's considered a sector that's difficult to reduce emissions in, is aviation, so passenger aviation. And here, if you can come up with measures that would limit the growth of aviation, so for business travel or for long-haul flights, then that will have a real impact. And because this is ours as a global scenario, to enable certain regions in the world to increase aviation, you also have advanced countries that actually basically have to sort of limit the amount of aviation long-haul travel that they would do. So you would need different incentives in place to encourage this, and some are through, for example, allowing short trips to be replaced by train infrastructure rather than by flight, so trying to discourage flying for short trips and various other measures. And that's important, A, for emissions, but B, also for things like the amount of biofuels that you would need for sustainable aviation in the scenario actually can go down if you sort of use behavioral measures to limit growth in the sector. And you mentioned the word policymakers in your question, and I think that's very key, because for all of these things, if we want to encourage these changes, it requires a lot of, you have to allow people the choice, and sometimes you have to create those conditions, and that requires a lot of policy and investment.
So the global milestones for the behavioral change are focused on industry, building and the transport, and needs many actions to be taken to achieve our expected target by 2030 and by 2050. If we would like to have like a conclusion or final statement by each panelist, we'll start with you, Engineer Fatima.
I just emphasize on the same discussion. We have to focus on overall consumption. We have to think of as how we consume our food that will need energy, will need other resources, how we consume our energy and water, which is mostly covered in some way of the strategies, but we need to expand it to other kind of resources that we are consuming. I think Sarah has mentioned with regard to the aviation, and this is a very important also behavior that we need to think about or to consider it on the future long-term strategy development, how to cover, to link into reducing the consumption of all resources that will have an impact on or a high emission using those services or the goods.
Suad?
I'm not going to talk on a corporate level.
Yes.
Because we all know why we're here, we all know the issues, and we are all putting forth actions.
Yes.
What we need to think a little bit more is on the social aspect. It's education. So the climate change scenario and issue has been around since the 1980s, if not 1970s, but it hasn't been so public. The media hasn't spoken about it, but today there's a very high level of awareness that it is actually happening, and we're very close to the danger zone. We are actually in the danger zone, basically. I think education is the key for us to start shifting this to becoming an issue, to becoming, khalas, this is the way of life. This is how we need to start living. Yes. This is what we need to start doing. This is how our children needs to start learning how to move forward. And it needs to become the norm of using trains instead of flights, yes. of using electric cars instead of gas guzzlers. And recycling is important. So it's all education of the next generation. I mean, unfortunately, we were supposed to do all of these things for it to become norm, but now we're in a situation that we need to use that to make sure that the next generation does not continue in the footsteps that we are in right now. Yeah. So it's not about corporations anymore. It's about literally looking at the society. What are the things that we need to put in educational systems, at homes, on the internet, on the news, in the newspapers? How are we supposed to get everyone on the same page? How are we supposed to make it affordable for everyone to live this way, yes. and to move forward to make it the norm?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How about you,
Yeah,
Sarah?
that's very inspiring. I guess I'd rebound on some of the sort of social comment on social issues. I think that's very important. I think when we're talking about needing to create shifts in society and behavior, we really need to think about how those are perceived, the fairness. We've seen challenges in public policy in certain countries where things are being labeled as being for the environment or for the climate, and there's a lot of resistance, and a lot of these issues are very valid, and people have real concerns about impact on their lives and their livelihoods and how they live, and all of that needs to be considered. And of course, if you look at it, none of those things are necessarily conflictual. Like, there's lots of ways it can go well, and I think a lot of it goes through very good communication, very good education, being clear on what's happening, really understanding the issues, and also being able to really make sure you're thinking about the benefits. I mean, people raised the benefits to consumers and the benefits to society, and we've seen certain, for example, road pricing or congestion charging systems that created a lot of resistance in the beginning, but when people saw how much better their cities were and actually saw that there were positive impacts, they actually got much more public support. And so I think we need to bear in mind, you know, what the aim is. The aim is shifts in society, but we need to think about what that means for people and focus on what are the benefits they're getting, what are the things that they will get, and sort of design things around that.
Good. Thank you, Ms. Sarah. So today we could know that the actions of individual can make a huge impact in achieving our target for net zero emissions. Finally, I would like to thank our experts, our beautiful ladies, for their valuable contribution and their time for being here and give us all this information, fruitful and very useful information regarding behavioral change. Thank you. Thank you for attending as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.